I need a wife, and you need a child, the cold billionaire told the lonely virgin. Clara Bell sat in the 14th row of the Grand Aurelian Hotel's shimmering ballroom, surrounded by people dressed in sleek suits and luxury colognes. As a high school librarian from the suburbs, Clara was clearly out of place at this academic fundraiser glittering with wealth. She hadn't paid for a ticket, but today's event offered free entry to educators, and the promise of almond tarts and sparkling orange juice beneath chandeliers was enough for her to say, "Let's call it a day off." She took a bite of the passion fruit mousse cake, grateful not to be repairing frayed books in a dusty library for once. Around her, the air buzzed with long-winded speeches from scholars and corporate sponsors. LED screens flashed graphs, pie charts, and buzzwords like innovation, automation, and reform. Clara didn't pay much attention. Her pen doodled ideas for next week's book club session, but her eyes kept drifting toward the man in the front row, the only one dressed entirely in black among a sea of soft gray suits. Ethan Grant, a luxury hotel magnate, known for a demeanor as cold as granite and eyes sharp as razors. He was the primary sponsor of the event and founder of a famous scholarship foundation for underprivileged students. To Clara, he was just another rich guy who'd probably never set foot in a public library. When the moderator called out, "Do any educators here have thoughts on corporate-funded scholarships?" Clara, emboldened perhaps by her third glass of orange juice, raised her hand. She stood, her beige maxi dress slightly wrinkled, and spoke in a clear, calm voice. "Scholarships are great. Thank you for your generosity. But sometimes it feels like we're teaching kids to work hard just to wait for the wealthy to grant them a shot. Education shouldn't be charity-based. It should be a fair system where no one has to wait for a miracle." The room went silent. A few people cleared their throats. A local news camera quickly swung to her direction. The moderator forced a polite smile, mumbling something about diverse perspectives. But Clara only noticed Ethan Grant's gaze, locked on hers. Not angry, not dismissive, just curious. A cold kind of curiosity, like she was a puzzle he hadn't solved. Clara sat down thinking, well, I'm doomed. But Ethan didn't see it that way. In his world of glass towers and sterile perfection, that messy-haired woman with a firm voice had just cracked something open. 1 week after the conference, Clara had almost forgotten those sharp, unreadable eyes. She was back to her busy schedule at the high school library, reshelving old textbooks, helping kids find children's novels, printing flyers for National Reading Day. Life wasn't easy, but it was hers, especially with the bank's third reminder letter of the month. Clara had applied to adopt a child over 6 months ago. She dreamed of having a family, just one mother, one child. But her application had been marked financially unstable. With her modest librarian salary, credit card debt, and a tiny apartment with no balcony, she understood why. Still, she never stopped wanting to be a mother. One rainy afternoon, while she was gluing a book spine back together and ignoring thunder outside, her phone rang from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was deep, polite, and far too composed to be a debt collector. "Miss Bell, this is Ethan Grant." Clara nearly dropped the tape dispenser. "Excuse me, who?" "We met at the Grand Aurelian conference. I have a proposal." Before she could decline, she received a restaurant address and a sleek black car arrived at the library to pick her up. It was too strange to say no. Clara walked into the upscale restaurant, trying to stay calm in her worn-out coat and flaking shoes. Ethan Grant was seated in the corner, posture as rigid as if the world were interviewing him. The warm yellow light fell on his face, which looked more like a marble sculpture than a man. "Miss Clara Bell," he greeted her with a nod. "You invited me here to sue me for what I said last week?" Clara half joked, half wary. Ethan didn't smile. He went straight to the point like he was running a boardroom. "I need a wife. Temporarily." Clara frowned. "This is what?" "A contractual marriage for 1 year. It's necessary to secure an upcoming European investment deal. Stability is expected. And for some reason, I, a broke librarian, am your top pick?" Ethan met her gaze, unblinking. "Because you were bold enough to challenge me in front of a crowd, and because I've reviewed your financial status, family history, and adoption application. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. You investigated me? I gathered data. So I'm a risk report? No, Ethan said softly. You're the only variable I couldn't ignore. Clara was speechless. She thought about walking away, but then Ethan added in the same cool tone he might use to propose a merger. You need money to clear your debt. You need family stability to qualify for adoption. I need a legal spouse. I help you. You help me. No one owes anyone. A thick marriage contract was laid on the table. Clara picked it up with shaking hands. The clauses were meticulous, clinical, pure Ethan Grant. But what made her pause wasn't the words. It was his eyes. For the first time, they weren't entirely cold. 1 year only? She asked quietly. 1 year, he confirmed. No honey, no PDA unless required. No invading each other's space. I'm me, you're you. Agreed. Clara looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. Fine, but I'm going to break every rule you've got. Ethan's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but definitely a crack. I'm good at handling rule breakers, he murmured. Clara had never imagined that one day she would sign a marriage contract, let alone with a billionaire whose face had fewer expressions than a machine. But 3 days after that strange dinner, she stood in the marble glass elevator lobby of the Grant Axiom building, dragging her worn-out suitcase, her heart thudding as if she'd just signed an agreement to live with a robot. The penthouse was on the 41st floor, spacious like a private resort. Everything was automated. Doors opened without a touch. Lights followed her footsteps, and as Clara crossed the threshold, a soft female AI voice floated through the air. Welcome, Miss Bell. Living room temperature has been set to 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Your private quarters are on the 2nd floor. The cactus in the corner requires no more than 100 mmol of water per week. Clara stood still for a moment, looked up at the ceiling, and murmured, Did I just walk into a space control center? At the base of the staircase, Ethan Grant was waiting. He stood perfectly straight, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, looking like a walking boardroom announcement. Without small talk, he handed her a thick leather-bound book and said simply, House Rules. Clara opened it. Times New Roman, size 12, packed tightly on every page. No loud music after 9 p.m. No cooking without prior notice. Do not open windows if outdoor humidity exceeds 60%. Absolutely no touching of any cactus. Clara raised an eyebrow and tried to keep a straight face, but the corners of her mouth twitched. You really have some strange hobbies, she said. Ethan nodded as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Her private room was 3 times the size of her old apartment. King-size bed, voice-activated wardrobe, a wide window overlooking a rooftop garden trimmed like art. She collapsed onto the bed, stared at the impossibly high ceiling, and whispered, This isn't a dream, right? Then she opened the mini fridge by the bed and froze. Inside sat a bottle of unsweetened orange juice with ginger, her exact favorite. No fancy brand, no mistake. Someone had placed it there knowing exactly what she liked. Clara frowned, looked around as if Ethan were watching through a hidden camera. How does he know? The first few days of cohabitation were eerily quiet. Ethan left early in the morning, came home near midnight, rarely speaking more than 10 words a day. No friendly eye contact, no questions. The entire house, though equipped with every luxury, felt colder than a silent control room. Clara, used to the laughter and chaos of teenagers, began to feel like she was living in a noise-canceled lab. One evening, she decided to crack the ice herself. She blasted pop music in the kitchen. Dancing Queen by ABBA echoed through the space as she danced while chopping tomatoes, her brown hair bouncing with every turn. Just then, Ethan walked in. He paused at the entrance, scanned the flour-dusted floor, bubbling sauce and loud music. His wristwatch blinked red. Volume exceeds permitted limit, he stated in a neutral tone. Clara turned, wooden spoon in hand, smiling brightly. Sorry, robot, she said loudly. This is a home, not a lab. She turned the volume up and continued twirling. Ethan folded his arms, gaze still icy, but his mouth, if Clara wasn't mistaken, twitched. Not quite a smile, but a crack. She saw it, and she claimed victory. The next morning, Clara woke up shivering. The AC had been running too cold through the night, but over her was a thin wool blanket, still warm. No note, no sign, but she knew there was only one person in the house who could have done it. The following day, a tiny cactus appeared on her desk. Beside it was a note written in rigid handwriting, "Exception, don't kill it." Clara stared at the note for a long second, then burst out laughing. He knows the word exception? Without Googling it? Another night, she made spaghetti again, with loud music. Ethan entered just as a ketchup bottle rolled off the table. He looked at the scattered mess, then at her. This is not a standard dinner. Clara picked up a piece of freshly baked bread and held it out to him. Try it. Not sweet this time. Ethan took it like it was an alien object. He took a bite, then winced. Still slightly sweet? Clara laughed so hard she nearly leaned against the counter for support. You really don't have taste buds. I give up. And somehow, through these little things, the space between them began to shrink. Ethan started asking questions he'd never asked before. How were your students today? Or, do you need another heater? He didn't change dramatically, but Clara noticed. He was beginning to notice her. She started calling him adorable robot, a teasing nickname without malice. And Ethan? He didn't say much in return, but Clara realized something. Every time she laughed, his eyes would pause on her, quietly. No interruption, no reaction, just watching. And oddly enough, that silence made her feel heard, deeply heard. It seems like all rigid systems, there always comes a point of collapse. That rainy night in the middle of nowhere, in a tiny wooden cabin, was the moment they finally touched, not as characters in a contract, but simply as two people, no longer pretending. That rainy night came unexpectedly, like most important things in life. The camping trip, organized by the adoption center, was meant to be a family bonding activity for couples in the approval process. Ethan hadn't planned to attend. He despised mud and temporary restrooms. But when he found out Clara had signed up, he canceled 3 meetings and got in the car with her without another word. The campsite lay deep in a sparse forest, beside a quiet lake. Children ran around laughing, couples set up tents and roasted marshmallows around the fire. Clara, in her worn sweater and waterproof boots, beamed as she folded paper planes with the kids. Ethan stood off to the side, watching her, silent, observing. She was the only one who wasn't pretending to be a perfect parent candidate. She was just herself. Then the clouds rolled in. Rain came fast, cold, and without warning. Groups scattered for cover. Clara grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him toward a small wooden cabin tucked among the trees. They barely slammed the door shut before the downpour hit the roof like a waterfall. The cabin was old, dim, with just one single bed, a cold fireplace, and a flickering flashlight hanging from the ceiling. Clara was soaked, her hair clinging to her forehead, shivering. Well, this just turned into a survival movie, she muttered, hugging herself. All I wanted was cookies and a ride home, not a starring role in Castaway. Ethan took off his outer jacket. For the first time, Clara saw him slightly undone. His shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled up, hair a little messy from the rain. He wrapped the coat around her shoulders, his voice low. Don't catch a cold. You know I'm terrible at making porridge. Clara blinked at him. You remember the ginger porridge? Still remember the taste, he replied, crouching down to light the fireplace. But he didn't know how to start a fire. He struck the match and smoke poured into the room, sending them both into a coughing fit. Clara laughed so hard her stomach hurt, then knelt beside him and pulled out a handful of newspaper scraps from her backpack. Within minutes, the fireplace crackled to life. The fire lit up their faces, warm, honest, and close. Librarian beats Billionaire. Scores 1-0. Clara grinned. Ethan glanced at her, his expression softer. You really are a professional rule breaker. I was born to be, she winked. You'll get used to it. They sat side by side on the tiny bed, sharing a bag of chocolate cookies Clara had brought. Rain pounded outside, but inside the cabin there was warmth and quiet laughter. Clara bit into a cookie and offered him the rest. Here, help me out. I don't want to be judged for eating the whole bag. Ethan took a bite, chewed slowly. 8.5. Less sweet than before. Clara laughed. Wow, you're generous tonight. I'll aim for a perfect 10 next time. 10's reserved for Michelin chefs, Ethan replied, but his voice had softened. Clara leaned her head gently on his shoulder, eyes half closed. She didn't know if it was the rain, the fire, or her heart betraying her will. But she stayed there, and Ethan didn't move away. Instead, he draped his arm around her shoulder, pulling the coat over them both. Don't actually catch a cold, he murmured. I wasn't kidding. My porridge is a disaster. Clara chuckled. I remember you said my bread was too sweet. Could have been the oven's fault, he muttered. They sat in silence. Only the rain outside, and something new building inside. Steady, fragile, terrifying. Then Clara whispered, Do you ever get scared? Scared things won't turn out the way you hoped? Ethan turned to look at her, his eyes dimming slightly. Yes, but I'm not good at saying it out loud. Clara nodded slowly. I'm scared I'll never be a mom. If the center rejects us again, I don't know if I can take it. Ethan's arm tightened slightly around her. Clara, you don't have to wait anymore. We could... He hesitated, something flickering in his eyes. Clara lifted her head. We could what? Say it. He looked straight into her eyes, his voice deep. We could be a real family. Her eyes widened. You mean that? Ethan nodded. He reached up and gently touched her chin, his fingers warm. No script. I want you. I want us. Clara trembled, not from the cold. She smiled faintly. You're scaring me, but I want to try too. Ethan leaned in. His lips touched hers, softly at first, then deeper, more certain, like he'd finally found the words he never knew how to say. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, her heart pounding like it had never known it could love again. No contract, no rules, just him and her and that rainy night. Love doesn't always need declarations, just a moment deep enough to see yourself in someone else's eyes. But once the heart opens, fear quietly walks in. And for Clara, it arrived sooner than she expected. Just 1 week after that rainy night, Clara found out she was pregnant. Clara never expected her heart to race not from Ethan's gaze, but from 2 undeniable red lines on a pregnancy test. Joy should have come first, but instead her chest tightened with fear, not fear of motherhood, but fear of his silence, of a man who once measured love by logic. And now, this, a child, something raw, real, and unpredictable, wasn't in the script, and she didn't know if he'd rewrite it with her or leave her to read it alone. She sat motionless on the edge of the bathtub, holding the test so tightly her knuckles turned white. 2 lines, clear, undeniable. A life was growing inside her, something not in any plan, and the first thing she felt wasn't joy, it was fear. Not fear of becoming a mother, she had dreamed of that for years, but fear of Ethan, fear of how he'd look at her when he found out. Fear of the silence that once made her feel safe, but now echoed like a vast, cold distance. Because Ethan had never spoken of children. The marriage contract, though quietly forgotten after the night in the cabin, still technically existed. And Ethan was still the man who trusted plans, avoided emotions, and rejected unpredictability. This child, born of a night filled with love, was still unpredictable in his world. Clara stepped back into the bedroom, the warm light unable to ease the tightening in her chest. Ethan wasn't home yet. She quietly packed a few clothes, pulled out her old coat from the closet, and sat down to write a letter. It was short, simple, but enough. She didn't want to stay long enough to hear the rejection. The letter on the kitchen counter read, I'm sorry, I know this wasn't in your plans, but I can't stay if the only thing holding us together is a contract set to expire. I don't know what you feel, but I know what I do. I love you, and I love this child, so I'm leaving, to protect that love, before it gets distorted by silence. Clara. The next morning, Ethan returned from a long meeting. He stepped into the quiet kitchen, removing his coat like always. Everything seemed normal, until he saw the letter. He opened it and read it slowly. And when his eyes reached the words, I love this child. Time seemed to stop. Ethan had never felt anything like this. Not during any multi-million-dollar merger, not even during moments of corporate crisis. It was an entirely foreign feeling. Panic. No calculation, no logic. Just a sudden, aching void that stole his breath. He immediately tried to call Clara. No answer. He texted, no reply. He contacted her assistant at the library, checked building security footage, reviewed her usual driving routes. Nothing. Clara was gone. And for the first time in his carefully engineered life, Ethan Grant, the man who believed everything could be controlled, realized there were things beyond his reach. He left the apartment and drove without a driver, without direction. No GPS, no destination, only instinct. The only thing he had left. The instinct to find the woman he loved. The storm inside Ethan hadn't stopped in 2 days since Clara disappeared. Every corner of the penthouse felt hauntingly empty. No hurried footsteps, no smell of morning cookies, no bursts of laughter echoing through the sterile walls. He searched everywhere. Calls, messages, email trails, nothing. It wasn't until Tuesday morning, in a moment of exhausted desperation, that he found himself parked aimlessly outside an elementary school, the same one where Clara had once volunteered part-time. And through the classroom window, he saw her. Clara was sitting on the carpet with a group of first graders, her hair loosely tied, a children's book resting in her lap, her lips curled in a gentle smile as she read aloud. She was still her, simple, peaceful, unfiltered. And in that moment, Ethan knew with perfect clarity, every plan he had ever trusted was meaningless without the woman sitting in that room. He stepped out of the car, his heartbeat pounding, louder than it had ever pounded for anyone before. The classroom door opened quietly. Ethan stood there dressed in a slightly wrinkled black suit from a sleepless night, his eyes carrying a weight of worry too heavy to put into words. Clara looked up. Her eyes met his like a gust of wind suddenly sweeping through a calm room. Her hand froze mid-page. The classroom fell silent. 20 small faces turned from their teacher to the strange man at the door. Faces too young to name the emotion they sensed, but old enough to feel it. She stood slowly, setting the book down on the table. "Ethan!" Her voice trembled. No surprise, no anger. Just a quiet, shaken breath. He stepped into the room. No hesitation, no formalities. He didn't care about the curious stares of the children. He only knew that if he didn't speak now, he might lose her again. And this time, forever. "Clara," he said, voice low but steady, "you may not believe me. You may think what we had was only a contract." He paused, his eyes landing gently on her belly, where he now knew a life was growing, part of him and part of her. "But I'm here not because of a contract, not for public image, not for any business deal." He inhaled sharply, as if mustering the courage to walk through fire. "I spent my whole life calculating outcomes, Clara. But the night you left, I realized I don't want outcomes anymore. I just want the two of you." The class held their breath. A boy in the front row blinked and asked, "Is that really your husband, Miss Clara?" A girl whispered, "This feels like a movie." Clara looked at Ethan, the man once known for control, now standing before her, vulnerable, wide open, and deeply in love. Tears fell. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't need to be strong anymore. Ethan walked toward her, slowly, gently, as if each step was an apology wrapped in silence. "I was scared," he whispered, just for her. "I've never been scared of anything in my life. But when I read the letter you left, my heart stopped. Not because you were pregnant, but because you left alone. Because you thought I wouldn't want to go with you." Clara sobbed, her hands wrapping around her stomach as if to protect both her heart and the child. A little girl walked up and handed Clara a handkerchief with a tiny bear stitched in the corner. "Don't be sad, Miss Clara," she said sweetly. "I think he really loves you." Clara laughed through her tears. Ethan came closer and knelt down in front of her, a gesture she'd never imagined from this man. "I have no plan for fatherhood," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard. "But if I had to choose between a perfect life without you and this chaotic, uncertain one with you and the baby, I'd choose the second one." Every single day. Clara looked down at him. His eyes weren't cold. They weren't calculating. They were wide open and full of something she'd waited so long to see. Truth. She bent forward and cupped his cheek in her palm. "I've been waiting to hear those words for so long." Ethan stood, gently pulled her into his arms and whispered, "Come home with me." She nodded against his chest, her voice trembling with relief. Home. Suddenly, the entire class erupted in applause, like the ending of a school play. A boy yelled, "Miss Clara's having a baby!" Another shouted, "That means you're not leaving us, right?" Clara held Ethan tighter, laughing through her tears. She had never imagined that a simple classroom, where she only came to teach a few kids how to read, would become the place where she reclaimed the greatest love of her life. The storm had passed, and this time, as they stepped out of that small classroom, neither of them was the same. Ethan held Clara's hand tightly all the way home. There was no need for long apologies, no heavy conversations, just softer glances and silences that, somehow, no longer felt empty. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, one hand resting gently on her belly, where a new life was growing with each passing day. In that moment, she wasn't afraid anymore. Ethan had chosen to stay, not out of obligation, but out of love. When the door to the penthouse opened again, it no longer felt like a showroom of high-end technology and strict routines. Clara stepped inside as if returning to the only place that had ever felt like hers. Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind and whispered, "Welcome home." From that day on, life took on a new rhythm. There were no more late-night meetings for Ethan, no more silent dinners with only the clinking of silverware echoing through an empty home. Instead, there were mornings where he made ginger tea for Clara, still a little heavy on the ginger. Evenings were filled with them reading aloud to the baby, arguing playfully over whether to name him Chris or some bizarre AI-generated name that made them laugh until their cheeks hurt. The apartment slowly changed with Clara's footsteps. A tiny vase of flowers appeared in the kitchen. A rocking chair for expectant mothers settled near the window in the living room. And the spare room, once known as the second office, had quietly transformed into a tiny, tender world painted in soft blue, filled with teddy bears and picture books. Ethan spent hours assembling the baby crib, despite having a dozen staff who could have done it in minutes, because as he said, "I want to build something with my own hands for him." Clara watched him with a quiet smile. The man who once viewed emotions as distractions was now hunched over a pile of screws, reading every instruction, even cutting his hand once when he attached the rail backward. One evening, as Clara lay back on the rocking chair, her belly noticeably round, she looked over at him and whispered, "We're going to be okay, right?" Ethan took her hand, looked at her with a peace she'd never seen before, and said, "No, we're going to be amazing." Chris was born on a crisp winter morning, when the wind had begun whispering against the windows. But inside the delivery room, all anyone could feel was warmth. The warmth of Ethan's hand tightly wrapped around Clara's, the wild mix of panic and joy in the eyes of a man becoming a father for the first time, and the pure, piercing cry of a newborn that broke the silence like a promise. A new chapter had begun. Clara held the baby against her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. And Ethan, the man always composed, always in control, stood there, unsure of what to do with his hands. He gently touched his son's tiny fingers, trembling as if touching something sacred. "Hello, Chris," he whispered. "Dad's here." From that moment on, Ethan Grant, the cold billionaire known for being on time and following every plan, stepped fully into a world of midnight cries, diaper chaos, and baby formula stains on tailored shirts. And he didn't back out. At first, it was chaos. He once assembled the crib, only to realize he'd installed the door backward. He made a bottle without tightening the cap. He tried changing Chris's diaper in a posture that made Clara laugh so hard she cried. "Are you changing a diaper or opening a laptop?" she teased. But every time he failed, he learned. Patiently, silently, determined. Whenever Chris cried, Ethan was the first to run in. Whenever the baby smiled, he was already there with the camera, capturing every second like he was afraid time might slip through his fingers. He read bedtime stories every night, still with a voice as stiff as a boardroom briefing, but eyes soft and gentle like a seasoned storyteller. He bought stuffed animals, not the most expensive ones, but a bright yellow duck, simply because Clara had once said it was her childhood favorite. Clara watched him, the man who once refused emotions, who always prioritized work, now sitting beside a crib, face exhausted, but still smiling as Chris curled his tiny fingers around his thumb for the first time. "I can't believe this," Clara said one night, lying beside him on the couch, her head on his shoulder. "There was a time I thought you'd never change." Ethan looked at her, eyes amused and tender. "I didn't change," he said quietly. "I just found something worth changing for." Their days were no longer run by rigid schedules, no more fixed meal times or sleep charts. Their new life was messy, but beautifully so. Mornings began with the soft cries of a hungry baby. Afternoons were filled with Chris's laughter, and evenings carried the warm scent of homemade porridge and lullabies playing in the background. One night, Clara found Ethan asleep beside the crib, still in his shirt, clutching a tiny stuffed duck like a promise he was determined to keep. She looked at him and whispered, "You're the miracle of my life." And though his eyes stayed closed, he heard her. A faint smile crept across his face. "No," he murmured. "You and Chris are mine." The once silent penthouse was now full of life. Ethan's office wall had become a gallery of toddler scribbles and Clara's sketches. The kitchen was dotted with sticky notes. "Tighten the bottle cap." "Cookies not for the baby," each ending with a doodled heart in colored marker. No one spoke of contracts anymore. No one referred to this as a conditional marriage, because now it was something entirely different. It was a real family. They didn't need to define love anymore, because each day and every laugh, every hug, and every echo of their child's joy, they found the clearest answer to a question they once feared to ask. Happiness is real. It was a peaceful evening. Clara sat in the rocking chair, holding little Chris in her arms. He was just over a year old, but still loved hearing bedtime stories from his mother. Ethan sat beside them, gently running his fingers through his son's soft hair, eyes half closed as if letting his soul drift with every page Clara turned. "Once upon a time," Clara read softly, "there was a man who didn't know how to love." Ethan chuckled quietly and tilted his head toward her. "That story sounds familiar?" Clara smiled. "Because it's true." They sat in silence for a moment, not because there was nothing left to say, but because sometimes love doesn't need words. At last, Ethan leaned in, gently whispering near her ear, "I love you." No hesitation, no Google search, no rehearsed lines. Clara turned to him, her eyes shimmering under the soft lamplight. She smiled, and in a playful tone that still made his heart skip, she said, "A perfect 10. Then she kissed his cheek gently. "You're not a robot anymore." Ethan laughed, a warm, quiet laugh that held none of the chill it once did. Just a man, sitting beside the woman he loved, and the little boy they'd brought into this world together. And that was enough. Because love in the end isn't about perfect people. It's about the ones who stay, who grow, and who choose each other again and again.